In the sprawling undercity of New Geneva Station, where alien aristocrats sip synthetic wine while looking down at the masses below, nobody paid attention to the old human pushing his rickety water cart through the narrow alleys. They saw wrinkled skin, bent shoulders, and heard the squeaky wheels that announced his presence 3 corridors away. They saw exactly what he wanted them to see. What they didn't see was the way his seemingly tired eyes catalogued every security camera, every guard patrol, every weakness in their defenses. They didn't notice how his clumsy movements positioned him perfectly to overhear classified conversations. And they certainly didn't recognize the most feared assassin in 3-star systems, a man whose very existence had become a whispered legend among those who trafficked in death. The Galactic Council had spent decades hunting the Droplet, a killer so precise, so invisible, that his targets simply stopped. No wounds, no toxins their scanners could detect, just death that came as quietly as morning dew. They never suspected that their most wanted man sold them water for 2 credits a bottle, day after day, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. But today was different. Today, Marcus Chen had received a contract that would either secure his retirement or ensure that his long masquerade finally came to an end. The target wasn't just another corrupt politician or crime lord. This time, he had to kill someone who might actually recognize him for what he truly was. The game was about to change, and the old water vendor was ready to remind the galaxy why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in known space. The morning rush on New Geneva Station began like every other morning for the past 15 years. Marcus Chen shuffled through the lower corridors, his ancient water cart creaking and groaning with each step. The wheels, deliberately kept unlubricated, announced his presence with their distinctive squeal. Alien commuters stepped aside without looking, their expressions ranging from mild annoyance to complete indifference. Perfect. Marcus had cultivated this image with the precision of a master craftsman. Every detail was calculated, from the slight hunch in his shoulders that made him appear 20 years older than his actual 63 years, to the faded clothes that suggested a man barely scraping by. Even his cart was a work of art in misdirection, rusty and beaten on the outside, but hiding compartments lined with quantum-stable materials that could house enough exotic toxins to depopulate a small moon. Water. Fresh water. 2 credits. His voice carried just the right amount of weariness, the tone of a man who had been hawking the same product for decades without hope of advancement. It was a voice that made people's eyes slide past him, dismissing him as part of the station's background noise. A young Zephyrian diplomat bumped into his cart while rushing toward the diplomatic sector, sending several bottles clattering to the floor. The blueskin alien barely paused to mumble an apology before hurrying away, no doubt late for some crucial negotiation about trade routes or territorial disputes. Marcus bent slowly to retrieve the bottles, playing up the stiffness in his joints. As he did, his enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation from the diplomat's communicator. Something about a delayed shipment from the Outer Rim, passwords being changed, and a security briefing scheduled for 1400 hours. Information. Even the smallest details could prove valuable later. Marcus had built his reputation on preparation, on knowing his targets better than they knew themselves. The Zephyrian might not be a target today, but, in this business, today's random encounter could become tomorrow's opportunity. He straightened up just as Ambassador Krethak of the Hegemony approached with his usual entourage of bodyguards. The massive reptilian being towered over most other species on the station, his scaled hide gleaming under the artificial lighting. Marcus had sold water to the ambassador dozens of times over the years, always maintaining the same bumbling, harmless demeanor. "Ah, the water seller," Krethak rumbled in his bass voice, the translator device at his throat converting his words into standard galactic. "Your usual inferior product, I assume?" Marcus bobbed his head deferentially. "Only the best for the honorable ambassador. Purified this morning, filtered through 3 different systems." He reached for one of the bottles, making sure his movements were slow and slightly arthritic. What Krethak didn't know was that Marcus had been slowly mapping the ambassador's routine for months. He knew that Krethak always chose the bottle third from the left, that he preferred his water at exactly 18 degrees Celsius, and that he had a mild allergy to trace amounts of copper that caused no symptoms but could be detected in blood tests for up to 72 hours. The ambassador's chief of security, a cybernetically enhanced human named Torres,
watched the exchange with professional paranoia.
Marcus had encountered Torres before, back when they had both worked in darker corners of the galaxy. But that was 30 years ago, and Marcus looked nothing like the lean, dangerous operative he had once been.
Torres's augmented eyes scanned him briefly before dismissing him as harmless.
2 credits, Marcus said, holding out the bottle with hands that trembled just slightly, another carefully practiced detail. Krethak handed over the money with the dismissive air of someone paying for something far beneath their status.
Your hands shake, old man. Perhaps it is time to consider retirement.
Can't afford to retire, Your Honor.
Still got bills to pay, mouths to feed.
Marcus's voice carried just a hint of desperation, the kind that made listeners uncomfortable enough to end the conversation quickly.
The ambassador and his entourage moved on, leaving Marcus alone with his cart in the corridor.
He waited exactly 43 seconds before beginning to push his cart toward the next section of the station.
To any observer, he was simply continuing his rounds.
In reality, he was executing a complex surveillance pattern that would take him past 6 different security checkpoints, 3 diplomatic residences, and 2 black market information brokers by lunchtime.
The first broker was a Centaurian named Vex who operated out of a legitimate-looking electronics repair shop in Sector 7.
Marcus had been cultivating this contact for 3 years, occasionally purchasing small pieces of information about station security and VIP movements.
Today, he needed something more specific.
The shop's entrance scanner identified him as Marcus Chen, independent water vendor, credit rating poor but stable. Vex looked up from a disassembled communication device as the door chimed.
Marcus. My favorite beverage entrepreneur. What brings you to my humble establishment?
Vex was one of the few beings on the station who treated Marcus with anything approaching genuine warmth. The Centaurian had a soft spot for small business owners, having once run a successful import operation before a rival family destroyed his shipping fleet and forced him into exile.
Thought you might be thirsty, Marcus said, selecting a bottle from his cart.
Been hearing interesting rumors lately.
Something about increased security in the diplomatic quarter. Rumors, yes. Always so many rumors in a place like this.
Vex accepted the bottle and transferred 5 credits to Marcus's account, triple the usual price, which meant he was buying information as much as refreshment.
I hear the hegemony is concerned about terrorist threats. Apparently, there have been some very specific death threats against certain high-ranking officials. Marcus nodded thoughtfully.
Terrible thing, terrorism.
Makes everyone nervous. Indeed. Nervous enough that they've hired additional security consultants. Very expensive ones. Vex's multifaceted eyes glittered with meaning.
The kind who specialize in problems that local security forces cannot handle. This was new information, and concerning. If the hegemony had brought in specialists, it meant they suspected a professional threat.
Marcus filed this away for later analysis.
Well, I hope they catch whoever's causing trouble, he said, beginning to push his cart toward the door.
Can't have people feeling unsafe. Of course not. Though I sometimes wonder if the fear of ghosts can be more dangerous than actual ghosts.
Marcus paused at the threshold. Vex was telling him something important, but in the carefully coded language that all information brokers used when discussing sensitive subjects.
Ghosts? Oh, you know.
Old stories.
Legends.
There's one in particular that has certain security agencies quite concerned. They call it the Droplet, supposedly some kind of master assassin who can kill without leaving any trace.
Complete nonsense, of course.
The kind of story people tell to scare children. Vex was looking directly at Marcus now, his expression unreadable.
Did he know? Impossible.
Marcus had been too careful, too thorough in constructing his cover identity. But information brokers survived by noticing things that others missed.
Sounds like something from a bad hologram drama, Marcus said with a dismissive chuckle. Well, I should get back to my rounds. This water won't sell itself. He left the shop without looking back, but his mind was racing.
Someone was getting close enough that word was filtering down through the criminal underground.
He had always known this day would come, the day when his reputation would start to catch up with his carefully constructed anonymity. The question was whether it was time to disappear entirely, or whether he had one more job left in him. The answer came 2 hours later, delivered by a method that few beings in the galaxy would have recognized. Marcus was refilling his cart at a public water station when he noticed that someone had carved a small symbol into the metal housing, a circle with 3 dots arranged in a triangle. To most people, it would look like random vandalism. To Marcus, it was a message from his handler. There was a job waiting. He finished filling his cart and made his way to the designated dead drop, a maintenance tunnel that supposedly led to the station's water recycling plant. The tunnel was exactly as boring as it appeared, which made it perfect for clandestine meetings. The package was hidden behind a loose panel exactly where he had expected it. Inside was a data chip containing target information, mission parameters, and a payment authorization that made his eyes widen slightly. Someone was willing to pay an extraordinary amount of money to have a specific person killed. Marcus slotted the chip into a reader that looked like a simple inventory scanner but was actually a highly sophisticated decryption device. The target information flowed across the small screen in encrypted text that rearranged itself as he read. Target, Admiral Zerath of the Hegemony Joint Fleet Command Location, currently aboard the Hegemony Cruiser Dominator, docked at New Geneva Station for diplomatic meetings. Timeline, elimination required within 72 hours. Special considerations, target is aware of potential threats and has requested additional security. All previous attempts have failed. All previous attempts. Marcus scrolled through the additional files and felt his estimation of the job's difficulty increase exponentially. 3 other professional assassins had tried and failed to eliminate Admiral Zerath over the past year. 2 were dead, and 1 had simply vanished without a trace. The Admiral was no ordinary target. He was the architect of the Hegemony's expansion into human space, the strategic mind behind a dozen successful military campaigns, and, reportedly, one of the few non-humans who truly understood how dangerous humans could be when cornered. If Zerath suspected that a human assassin was operating on the station, he would be taking precautions specifically designed to counter human methods. This wouldn't be a simple matter of slipping poison into his drink or arranging an accident. Marcus deleted the files and destroyed the data chip according to protocol. As he made his way back to the main corridors, his mind was already working through possible approaches. The Admiral would be heavily guarded, probably with both conventional security and exotic detection equipment. Getting close enough for a traditional assassination would be nearly impossible. But Marcus had spent 15 years becoming invisible in plain sight. He wasn't just any assassin, he was a man who had perfected the art of being overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten. The old water vendor had work to do. Back in the main corridor, Marcus resumed his rounds with the same shuffling pace as always. But now his route took him toward the docking bay where the Hegemony cruiser was berthed. He needed to begin reconnaissance immediately if he was going to have any chance of completing this mission within the 72-hour deadline. As he approached the security checkpoint leading to the restricted docking areas, Marcus allowed himself a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Let the Admiral bring all the specialists he wanted. Let him implement every security protocol in the book. In the end, they were all looking for a killer who looked like death itself. They would never suspect the old man selling water. The Hegemony Cruiser Dominator loomed before Marcus like a metallic mountain, its hull bristling with weapons systems and sensor arrays that could detect a grain of sand moving at unusual velocity 3 kilometers away. The security perimeter around the docking bay had been expanded to include 3 concentric rings of checkpoints, each staffed with guards representing different species and security philosophies. Marcus approached the outer checkpoint pushing his cart, the wheels squeaking their familiar tune. The Hegemony guard, a stocky Borlean with 4 arms and compound eyes, looked up from his scanner display with obvious irritation. Restricted area, human. Authorized personnel only. Oh, sorry sir, Marcus replied, adding just the right amount of confusion to his voice. I was told some of the crew might want to buy water. Been selling to military folks for years, they always get thirsty working those long shifts. The guard's translator made a grinding noise that Marcus recognized as Borlean laughter. You think the crew of the Dominator drinks your recycled swill?
They have hydration systems worth more than you make in 10 years.
Well, sure, but sometimes folks like the personal touch, you know?
Something with a bit of flavor instead of those sterile military rations. Marcus reached for one of his bottles, moving slowly to avoid triggering any defensive responses.
Here, try a sample.
Pure stuff, filtered through natural minerals. The guard waved him away with two of his arms while continuing to monitor his screens with the other two.
Move along, old man. Find some tourists to fleece.
Marcus bobbed his head apologetically and began to turn his cart around. As he did, his enhanced peripheral vision cataloged everything he could see through the checkpoint. Guard positions, scanner configurations, the rotation schedule posted on a nearby wall, and, most importantly, the delivery entrance where supplies were being loaded onto the cruiser.
The supply convoy included water shipments.
Marcus spent the rest of the day mapping the security perimeter, approaching from different angles and always maintaining his harmless vendor persona. Each encounter provided additional intelligence. The guards were professional but not paranoid. They were watching for armed infiltrators and sabotage equipment, not for a tired old man selling bottles of water. By evening, Marcus had identified 17 different ways that supplies reached the Dominator, from food shipments to replacement parts to diplomatic courier services. Each supply line represented a potential vector of attack, but most were too heavily monitored or involved too many verification steps.
Except for one.
The ship's water recycling system had developed a minor malfunction that required temporary supplementation from external sources. Not drinking water, the crew would never trust outside sources for that. But water for non-critical systems like cleaning, hydroponics, and the decorative fountains in the diplomatic quarters. Marcus made his way to his small apartment in the residential sector, moving with the same tired shuffle he had maintained all day. Once inside, he activated several layers of electronic countermeasures and began to shed his carefully constructed disguise. The apartment looked like what it was supposed to be, the humble dwelling of a man barely making ends meet.
Second-hand furniture, outdated entertainment systems, walls that needed repainting.
But behind the bathroom mirror was a hidden chamber containing equipment that most intelligence agencies would kill to possess. Marcus opened a sealed container and extracted a small vial of what appeared to be ordinary water.
In reality, it was one of his most sophisticated creations, a binary compound that remained completely inert until activated by a specific electromagnetic frequency.
Once triggered, it would begin breaking down organic neural tissue at the molecular level, causing death that looked exactly like a massive stroke. The beauty of the compound was its invisibility. Standard medical scanners would detect nothing more than trace minerals and purification additives. Even advanced autopsy procedures would find nothing suspicious. The breakdown process was designed to mimic natural cellular degradation. But getting the compound to Admiral Zerath would require more than just contaminating the ship's water supply. The Admiral would have personal hydration systems, probably with multiple filtration stages and real-time chemical analysis. Marcus needed a delivery method that would bypass all security protocols while ensuring that only the target was affected. He spent 3 hours reviewing schematics of hegemony cruiser designs that he had acquired over the years from various sources. The Dominator was a sovereign-class vessel, which meant it would have standard diplomatic quarters located in the most secure section of the ship. The Admiral's personal quarters would be within that section, probably with independent life support systems. Marcus was deep in planning when his secure communication system chimed with an emergency signal. Only 3 people in the galaxy had access to that frequency, and 2 of them were probably dead. The message was brief: package delayed. Secondary team en route. Adjust timeline accordingly. Secondary team. That meant someone else was targeting Admiral Zerath, which could either be a complication or an opportunity. If another assassin was making a move, it might provide the distraction Marcus needed to get close to his target. Or it might alert Zerath that professional killers were operating on the station. Marcus encrypted a reply: understood. Proceeding with original plan. He sealed the vial back in its protective container and began preparing for the next phase of his mission. Tomorrow, he would need to get much closer to the Dominator than anyone expected the old water vendor to go.
The morning shift change on New Geneva Station began at 0600 hours.
Marcus had positioned himself near the supply depot 3 hours earlier, having identified the exact moment when the night security team would be at their least alert. His cart was loaded with bottles specially prepared for this mission, each one containing water that had been treated with harmless but distinctive trace minerals that would show up on any detailed analysis. At 0647 hours, the supply convoy began forming up for the morning delivery run to the Dominator. Marcus approached the loading supervisor, a harried-looking human woman with grease stains on her coveralls and a data tablet that never stopped beeping with incoming requests.
"Supervisor Chen? Sorry to bother you, but I think there might be a problem with your water order."
The woman looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who had dealt with one too many problems already that morning.
"What kind of problem?"
"Well, I was talking to some of the crew yesterday, and they mentioned that the ship's recycling system wasn't working right.
Thought you might need some emergency backup supplies."
Marcus gestured to his cart.
"I know it's not much, but if they're running short."
Supervisor Chen checked her tablet, scrolling through pages of supply requests and delivery schedules.
"Damn. Yeah, there's a note here about supplemental water for non-critical systems. How much you got?" "About 200 liters.
Not enough to make a real difference, but might help until the regular suppliers get their act together."
200 liters.
She made a note on her tablet.
"Price?"
Marcus quoted a figure that was barely above cost, low enough to seem like a desperate vendor trying to unload surplus inventory. Supervisor Chen approved the purchase without a second thought. It was a minor line item that wouldn't even register in the day's budget reports.
"Loaded on truck 7.
They'll test it when they get to the ship, so make sure it's actually clean."
"Oh yes, absolutely.
Purified this morning, filtered 3 times.
Clean as anything you'd get from the big suppliers."
Marcus helped load his bottles onto truck 7, making sure to position them exactly where he wanted them in the cargo manifest. Each bottle was labeled with a code that would direct it to specific systems aboard the ship: laundry facilities, hydroponics, cleaning systems. And one special bottle, marked for the diplomatic quarters' decorative water features. The convoy departed at 0730 hours with Marcus watching from a distance.
Phase 1 was complete.
Now came the more dangerous part: getting aboard the ship himself. Marcus spent the next hour observing the Dominator's external security protocols. Guard patrols followed predictable patterns, with shift changes that created brief gaps in coverage. The ship's scanning systems were focused on detecting weapons and explosives, not on analyzing the molecular composition of maintenance equipment. At 0900 hours, Marcus presented himself at the civilian contractor processing station. He had shed his water vendor persona and now appeared to be what his forged credentials claimed: a maintenance technician specializing in atmospheric recycling systems.
"Chen, Marcus.
Hear about the air scrubber calibration," he told the processing clerk, a bored-looking Rigelian who was clearly counting the hours until his shift ended. The clerk scanned Marcus's credentials and compared them to the work order database. The job was legitimate. Marcus had arranged for a real maintenance request to be filed through legitimate channels, though the contractor who was supposed to handle it had suddenly developed a case of food poisoning that would keep him bedridden for several days.
"Deck 15, Engineering Section. Your escort will meet you at the airlock."
Marcus nodded and submitted to the standard security screening.
"Metal detector, chemical scanner, biometric verification. All passed without incident."
The identity he was using had been built over 5 years of careful preparation, complete with employment history, personal references, and a medical record showing a man recovering from a serious back injury that explained his cautious movements. The escort was a junior engineering officer named Kelther, a young hegemony reptilian who seemed more interested in his datapad than in watching Marcus.
"Perfect. First time on a Sovereign-class cruiser?" Kelther asked as they walked through corridors that gleamed with military precision.
"Yes, sir. Heard they were impressive, but this is something else." Marcus let genuine appreciation creep into his voice. The ship really was impressive, a masterpiece of engineering and design.
It was almost a shame that he was here to kill someone aboard it. Engineering section was located in the heart of the ship, surrounded by multiple layers of security and redundant systems.
Marcus was escorted to the air scrubber he was supposed to calibrate and left alone while Kelther returned to more important duties. Marcus worked on the air scrubber for exactly long enough to satisfy anyone who might review security footage later. The work was straightforward, he actually was qualified to perform this type of maintenance, and it gave him an excuse to access the ship's environmental control systems. While his hands worked on the calibration equipment, his eyes were mapping everything around him. Ventilation ducts, power conduits, emergency systems, access panels. Most importantly, he located the main environmental control junction that regulated atmosphere throughout the ship. After 90 minutes, Marcus completed the calibration and requested an escort back to the airlock. But, during those 90 minutes, he had accomplished far more than anyone suspected. Microsensors had been planted in 3 different locations, each one no larger than a grain of sand and completely undetectable by standard scanning equipment. The sensors would monitor ship communications, track personnel movements, and, most importantly, would detect the specific electromagnetic signature that would activate the binary compound now flowing through the ship's non-critical water systems. Marcus was back on the station by 11:30 hours, once again dressed as the harmless water vendor. Phase 2 was complete. Now he had to wait for the perfect moment to trigger the compound. That moment came 18 hours later. Marcus was monitoring the microsensors from his apartment when Admiral Zarath finally made a mistake. The Admiral had been cautious since arriving at New Geneva Station, varying his schedule and avoiding predictable patterns. But even the most paranoid individual eventually fell victim to routine. Every evening at 2100 hours, Admiral Zarath visited the meditation garden in the diplomatic quarters. It was a private ritual, something he had done for decades as a way to clear his mind and prepare for the next day's challenges. The garden featured several decorative water fountains that created a peaceful atmosphere for contemplation. Water fountains that were supplied by the ship's non-critical water systems. Water fountains that now contained Marcus's binary compound. Marcus activated the electromagnetic trigger at exactly 2103 hours, when his sensors confirmed that Admiral Zarath was alone in the meditation garden. The compound would take approximately 4 minutes to reach full activation, and another 2 minutes to take effect. Admiral Zarath would appear to suffer a massive stroke while meditating peacefully in his private garden. There would be no evidence of foul play, no traces of exotic toxins, nothing to suggest that one of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy had been murdered by a man who sold water for 2 credits a bottle. At 2109 hours, the microsensors detected emergency medical signals from the diplomatic quarters. Admiral Zarath had collapsed and was unresponsive. At 2127 hours, Admiral Zarath was pronounced dead. Marcus began destroying evidence and preparing to disappear from New Geneva Station forever. The old water vendor had completed his final job. The death of Admiral Zarath sent shockwaves through the diplomatic community on New Geneva Station within hours. By morning, the station was crawling with investigators from 6 different security agencies, each with their own theories about what had happened to one of the hegemony's most important military leaders. Marcus pushed his water cart through corridors that buzzed with tension and whispered conversations. Security checkpoints had tripled overnight, and every civilian was being viewed with suspicion. Yet somehow, the old water vendor remained invisible, just another piece of background scenery that investigators walked past without a second glance. He was refilling bottles at a public water station when he overheard 2 hegemony security officers discussing the preliminary autopsy results. Their conversation was in rapid hegemonic battle cant, a military dialect that few non-natives understood. Unfortunately for them, Marcus had spent 3 years embedded with hegemony forces during the Proxima conflict and spoke the language fluently. No toxins detected. Neural tissue shows signs of massive cellular breakdown, but the pattern matches natural stroke symptoms exactly. Natural? Zarath was in perfect health 2 days ago. His last medical scan showed the cardiovascular system of someone half his age. Could be genetic predisposition. Some conditions don't show symptoms until they suddenly manifest. Or it could be something our scanners can't detect. The timing is too convenient.
3 attempts on his life in the past year, and now he dies of natural causes just when he's about to finalize the defense contracts with the outer colonies? Marcus continued filling bottles while processing this information. The investigators were suspicious, which was expected. But they were also clearly baffled by the lack of evidence. The binary compound was performing exactly as designed. What concerned him more was the mention of defense contracts. Admiral Zerath had been negotiating something significant, something that multiple parties might want to prevent. Marcus's client had paid an enormous sum to have the admiral eliminated, but the identity of that client remained unknown even to him. He was considering this when a new voice entered the conversation, one that made his blood run cold. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Agent Sarah Voss, Terran Intelligence Division. I understand you're investigating the admiral's death." Marcus's hands didn't shake as he continued his task, but, inside, alarm bells were ringing. The Terran Intelligence Division only sent their best agents for cases involving human interests, and Sarah Voss was the best of the best. More importantly, she was one of the few people in the galaxy who knew that the droplet was more than just a legend. 8 years ago, Marcus had worked with TID on a joint operation to eliminate a rogue weapons dealer who was selling human military secrets to hostile alien forces. The mission had been successful, but it had also revealed the existence of a human assassin with capabilities that defied conventional understanding. Voss had been the TID liaison on that operation, and she had come uncomfortably close to identifying Marcus's real identity. If she was here, it meant that someone suspected human involvement in Admiral Zerath's death. Marcus finished filling his bottles and began pushing his cart toward the diplomatic sector, where increased security presence would provide perfect cover for gathering more intelligence. As he moved, he listened to fragments of conversation from the various investigation teams now swarming the station. The hegemony security forces were focusing on political enemies of the admiral. The station's own security was investigating possible technical sabotage of the ship's life support systems. The diplomatic corps was quietly exploring whether the death might be connected to the ongoing trade negotiations. But Agent Voss was asking different questions. She was interviewing staff about unusual personnel movements, unauthorized access to sensitive areas, and anyone who had been in multiple locations relevant to the case. Marcus had been careful to avoid security cameras and maintain his established patterns, but Voss had a talent for seeing connections that others missed. If she started mapping the movements of everyone who had been near both the supply depot and the Dominator during the critical time window, she might notice a pattern that could lead back to him. He needed more information about what TID suspected and how close they were to identifying him. Fortunately, Marcus had spent 15 years building a network of contacts throughout the station, and some of those contacts had access to information that wasn't supposed to be shared. His first stop was the data archive clerk who had been selling copies of surveillance footage for the past 3 years. The betazoid named Thranks was nervous and sweaty when Marcus approached his workstation, clearly aware that increased security attention meant increased risk for anyone involved in questionable activities. "Marcus. My favorite beverage entrepreneur. I'm afraid business hours are suspended indefinitely due to current circumstances. Just wanted to sell you some water, Thranks. You look like you need it." Marcus placed a bottle on the workstation and transferred 6 credits to Thranks' account. "Heard there's been a lot of excitement around here. Must be keeping you busy." Thranks accepted the bottle gratefully and took a long drink before responding. "Busy doesn't begin to describe it. They've requested archives going back 6 months for the entire diplomatic quarter." 6 months? Do you know how much data that represents? Sounds like a big investigation. They looking for anything specific? Human movements, primarily. Apparently there's some theory that Admiral Zerath was killed by a human operative. They're particularly interested in anyone who had access to multiple secure areas over the past week. Marcus nodded sympathetically while his mind raced. 6 months of surveillance data would definitely include footage of him in various locations throughout the station. His disguise was good, but it wasn't perfect. If TID analysts started looking for patterns in human movement, they might notice the same face appearing in too many places at too many significant times. Well, I hope they catch whoever did it, Marcus said. Can't have people thinking the station isn't safe. He left the archive center and continued his rounds, but now his route was carefully planned to gather intelligence on the investigation while avoiding areas where his presence might later seem significant. He needed to know exactly what evidence TID had collected and how close they were to identifying him. The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus was selling water near the main security checkpoint when he noticed a familiar figure among the TID personnel. Commander James Torres, the cybernetically enhanced security specialist he had encountered while selling to Ambassador Krethak. But Torres wasn't just providing security consultation, he was actively participating in the investigation, reviewing footage and asking detailed questions about station personnel. That was when Marcus realized the true scope of the problem he was facing. Torres might not have recognized him yet, but the man was a professional investigator with enhanced sensory capabilities and decades of experience hunting dangerous individuals. If Torres started focusing on him specifically, the carefully constructed identity of the harmless water vendor might not be enough protection. Marcus needed to accelerate his exit strategy. He returned to his apartment and began the process of destroying evidence and preparing false identities for evacuation. His extraction plan had always included multiple contingencies, but he had hoped to have weeks or months to implement them gradually. Now he might have hours. As he worked, Marcus monitored news feeds and security bulletins for any indication of how the investigation was progressing. The official story was that Admiral Zayrath had died of natural causes, but behind the scenes, the hunt for his killer was intensifying rapidly. At 1430 hours, Marcus received another encrypted message on his secure communication system. Secondary team eliminated. Primary objective achieved. Recommend immediate extraction. Secondary team eliminated. The other assassin who had been targeting Admiral Zayrath was dead, probably killed by the same security forces now hunting for Marcus. That suggested the investigators were making progress, following leads that might soon point in his direction. Marcus encrypted a reply, extraction approved. Beginning withdrawal protocol. But, as he prepared to transmit the message, his apartment's intrusion detection system triggered a silent alarm. Someone was approaching his door, multiple someones, moving with the careful precision of trained operatives. Marcus deleted the message and activated his apartment's defensive systems. Hidden panels opened to reveal escape routes and emergency equipment, while sophisticated jamming devices blocked all electronic surveillance of the room. A voice called out from the corridor, "Mr. Chen? This is Agent Voss with Terran Intelligence. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your activities over the past week." They had found him. Marcus considered his options rapidly. He could attempt to maintain his cover identity and answer their questions, hoping that his documentation would withstand detailed scrutiny. He could try to escape through one of the hidden passages, though that would confirm their suspicions and trigger a station-wide manhunt. Or he could take a more direct approach and eliminate the immediate threat. "Just a moment," he called out, adding a quaver to his voice that suggested nervousness rather than calculation. "Let me get decent." Marcus activated several more defensive systems and began arming himself with weapons that had been hidden throughout the apartment. If Agent Voss had come here, it meant they had evidence linking him to Admiral Zayrath's death. The time for subtle misdirection was over. The old water vendor was about to remind Terran Intelligence why their files on the droplet were classified at the highest possible level. Marcus moved to the door's viewing panel and confirmed that Agent Voss was accompanied by 2 other TID operatives and Commander Torres. All 4 were armed and positioned to prevent escape through normal routes. What they didn't know was that Marcus Chen, humble water vendor, had never been normal. "Coming," he called out, his voice still carrying that harmless, elderly tremor. Behind the door, Marcus was transforming from a tired old man into something much more dangerous. His movements became fluid and precise, his posture straightened, and his eyes took on the cold calculation of a predator who had been cornered. The investigators were about to learn why humans had developed such a fearsome reputation throughout the galaxy. They were about to discover that the greatest weapon any species possessed wasn't advanced technology or superior firepower.
It was the ability to become something completely unexpected when survival was at stake. Marcus opened the door with a smile that never reached his eyes, and Agent Voss found herself looking into the face of one of the most dangerous killers in known space.
Good afternoon, Agent Voss. I believe you wanted to ask me some questions.
Agent Sarah Voss had interrogated hundreds of suspects during her 20-year career with Terran intelligence, and she prided herself on being able to read people within the first 30 seconds of contact. But, as she looked into Marcus Chen's eyes, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine uncertainty about what she was facing. The man before her appeared to be exactly what his records claimed: a 63-year-old water vendor with a clean criminal record and a medical history showing chronic back problems. But there was something in his eyes, a depth of calculation that didn't match his humble appearance.
Mr. Chen, I'm Agent Voss with Terran Intelligence.
These are Agents Rivera and Park, and Commander Torres from Station Security. We're investigating the death of Admiral Zarath, and we'd appreciate a few minutes of your time. Marcus stepped aside and gestured them into his apartment with the slightly nervous politeness of a law-abiding citizen trying to be helpful.
Of course, Agent Voss. Terrible thing about the Admiral. Please, come in. Would anyone like some water?
The apartment looked exactly like what they expected: worn furniture, outdated electronics, the smell of cheap food, and cleaning chemicals. Agent Rivera began a subtle scan for electronic devices while Agent Park positioned himself to watch both Marcus and the apartment's single exit. Commander Torres, however, was studying Marcus with the intensity of someone trying to place a half-remembered face. His cybernetic enhancements were running facial recognition protocols against databases spanning 4 decades of intelligence files. Mr. Chen, according to our records, you've been operating a water sales business on this station for 15 years.
That's quite a long time to stay in one place.
Voss settled into a chair that gave her a clear view of both Marcus and the door.
Yes, well, it's steady work. People always need water, and I'm not young enough anymore to be chasing opportunities across the galaxy.
Marcus lowered himself slowly into another chair, making sure his movements suggested arthritic joints rather than controlled caution. You must know the station very well after all that time.
I imagine you have access to areas that most civilians never see. I suppose so.
My route takes me through most of the public areas, and sometimes I deliver to work crews in maintenance sections.
Nothing secret, just ordinary folks doing their jobs. Voss nodded and consulted her datapad.
We've been reviewing security footage from the past week, and your name appears on several access logs for areas near the diplomatic sector.
Can you tell us about that?
Marcus had been expecting this question.
Oh yes, I've been selling to the construction crew working on the new embassy offices. They're putting in some kind of special water filtration system, very fancy stuff.
The workers get thirsty, and the regular vending machines don't work in that area because of all the dust and noise. It was a perfect cover story, detailed enough to sound authentic, but referencing work that would be difficult to verify quickly. Marcus had actually arranged for such a construction project to be scheduled, though the crew had been delayed by permit issues that would keep them off station for another week. Agent Rivera finished her scan and shook her head slightly. No hidden electronics, no weapon signatures, no indication that this was anything other than a modest apartment belonging to a working-class vendor. But Commander Torres was frowning, his enhanced memory systems churning through facial recognition data from his extensive military career. Something about Marcus was triggering alerts, but the match wasn't clear enough to generate a positive identification.
Mr. Chen, Torres said, leaning forward slightly, have we met before? You seem familiar.
Marcus allowed a small smile to cross his features. I've sold water to a lot of people over the years, Commander.
Could be you bought a bottle from me and forgot about it. Happens all the time. Maybe. But Torres didn't look convinced. Voss continued her questioning, focusing on Marcus's movements during the critical time period when Admiral Zarath had been poisoned.
Each question was designed to probe for inconsistencies in his story or signs of deception in his responses.
The morning Admiral Zarath died, our records show you made a delivery to the supply depot.
That's unusual, most of your sales are direct to customers.
Yes, that was a special arrangement. The depot supervisor, Miss Chen, funny coincidence with the name, she had heard that the Hegemony ship was having problems with their water recycling system. Asked if I had any surplus inventory to help them out as a temporary measure. And, you just happen to have 200 liters of surplus water ready for immediate delivery? Well, not exactly surplus. I had to use my emergency reserve, which meant I couldn't make my regular rounds that day. Cost me quite a bit in lost sales, but it seemed like the right thing to do. Marcus was threading a careful path between truth and deception. Every detail he provided was technically accurate, but interpreted in a way that supported his cover identity rather than revealing his real purpose. Agent Park spoke for the first time since entering the apartment. Mr. Chen, what can you tell us about binary compounds? The question was designed to catch Marcus off guard, to see if his reaction would reveal specialized knowledge. Marcus blinked in confusion and tilted his head slightly. Binary compounds? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Is that some kind of chemical thing? It's a type of toxin that remains inert until activated by an external trigger. Very sophisticated, usually only available to intelligence agencies and advanced research facilities. Marcus shook his head slowly. Sounds like something from a science fiction movie. I just sell water, Agent Park. The most complicated chemistry I know is how to check pH levels and mineral content. Voss watched his responses carefully, looking for micro-expressions or physiological indicators of deception. Marcus's vital signs remained steady, his body language consistent with someone who was nervous about being questioned but had nothing to hide. The problem was that Marcus had spent decades training to pass exactly this type of interrogation. His control over his autonomic nervous system was so complete that he could regulate his heart rate, blood pressure, and even pupil dilation at will. To any observer, including sophisticated sensing equipment, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be. Mr. Chen, Voss said, would you be willing to accompany us to the security office for a more detailed interview? We'd also like to run some additional scans, just to eliminate you from our investigation. This was the critical moment. Agreeing to more detailed questioning would mean exposing himself to equipment that might detect traces of exotic chemicals or identify inconsistencies in his biological markers. Refusing would confirm their suspicions and trigger immediate arrest. Marcus appeared to consider the request carefully, then nodded with the resigned expression of someone who understood that cooperation was his best option. Of course, Agent Voss. I want to help however I can. Just let me grab a jacket, these security offices are always cold. He rose slowly from his chair and walked toward a coat closet near the apartment's entrance. As he reached for a jacket, his hand briefly touched a concealed control panel hidden behind the doorframe. Across the station, a series of carefully placed explosive charges began their countdown sequences. Marcus had always known this day might come, and he had prepared accordingly. If his identity was compromised and escape became impossible, he had one final option: create enough chaos and destruction to cover his tracks while eliminating anyone who could connect him to the droplet. The charges were positioned in 12 different locations throughout New Geneva Station, each one targeting critical infrastructure or systems that would cause maximum disruption. Power generators, life support systems, communication arrays, and docking clamps for visiting ships would all suffer simultaneous failures in exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds. In the confusion that followed, Marcus would disappear completely. The old water vendor would be presumed dead, killed in the terrorist attack that had claimed dozens of other lives. By the time investigators sorted through the wreckage, he would be on a transport ship bound for the Outer Rim, carrying identity documents that would make him invisible once again. But, first, he had to deal with the 4 intelligence operatives who were now escorting him toward what they believed was his interrogation. Marcus pulled on his jacket and smiled pleasantly at Agent Voss. Ready when you are. As they left the apartment, Marcus began counting down the time remaining until the explosions would tear New Geneva Station apart. He had 11 minutes to get clear of the investigators and reach his extraction point. 11 minutes to remind the galaxy why humans were considered the most dangerous species in known space.
The group walked through corridors that hummed with normal station activity, past civilians and workers going about their daily routines, unaware that their world was about to change forever. Marcus maintained his shuffling pace, playing the role of an elderly man trying to keep up with younger, more physically capable escorts. Commander Torres kept glancing at him, his enhanced memory systems still struggling to place Marcus's face in the proper context. The recognition was coming, but, slowly, filtered through decades of accumulated data and the cognitive dissonance of seeing a legendary assassin disguised as a harmless vendor. They had just reached the main security checkpoint when Torres finally made the connection. "Wait." The commander stopped walking and turned to face Marcus directly. "I know who you are." Agent Voss looked between Torres and Marcus, her hand automatically moving closer to her weapon. "What are you talking about?" "Proxima Station, 32 years ago. The Caliph arms dealer who was selling human military secrets. Someone eliminated him and his entire organization in a single night, made it look like an internal power struggle." Marcus continued to look confused, but inside he was calculating distances and response times. Torres was 8 meters away, armed with both conventional weapons and cybernetic enhancement systems. The other 3 agents were positioned to provide mutual support and block potential escape routes. I was military intelligence then, part of the cleanup crew. We found traces of exotic toxins that shouldn't have existed, evidence of infiltration techniques that nobody should have been able to execute. The operation was perfect, too perfect for any normal operative. Torres's voice was growing stronger as his certainty increased. They called it the work of the Droplet, a human assassin who could kill anyone, anywhere, without leaving evidence. Most people thought it was just a legend, a story to scare our enemies. Marcus finally looked directly at Torres, and, for the first time, allowed his true nature to show in his eyes. The harmless confusion disappeared, replaced by the cold calculation of a predator who had been cornered. "But, you don't think it's a legend, do you, Commander?" The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus's posture straightened slightly, his movements became more fluid, and something in his voice suggested depths of experience and capability that hadn't been there moments before. Agent Voss drew her weapon instantly. "Everyone down. Now." But Marcus was already moving, his elderly shuffle replaced by the lightning-fast reactions of a master assassin. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, he had closed the distance to Agent Park, disarmed him, and positioned himself so that the other agents couldn't fire without hitting their colleague. "You should know, Agent Voss," Marcus said conversationally, even as he maintained his human shield, "that this station is about to experience some technical difficulties. You have approximately 8 minutes to reach minimum safe distance." As if to emphasize his point, the station's emergency lighting system flickered briefly, a sign that the countdown had reached its first checkpoint. "What did you do?" Voss demanded, her weapon trained on Marcus but unable to fire cleanly. "What I always do when cornered," Marcus replied. "I remind people why it's dangerous to hunt a human." The old water vendor was gone completely now, replaced by something much more dangerous. Commander Torres had been right, they were facing the Droplet, the most feared assassin in 3 star systems. And he had just declared war on everyone around him. Marcus smiled, and, for the first time since they had met him, it reached his eyes. "Run, Agent Voss. You have 7 minutes and 43 seconds to save your life." Agent Voss had faced armed terrorists, hostile alien operatives, and rogue artificial intelligences during her career, but she had never encountered anything like the transformation she witnessed in Marcus Chen. The harmless old man had vanished completely, replaced by someone who radiated lethal competence from every movement. 7 minutes, 30 seconds, Marcus said calmly, maintaining his grip on Agent Park while calculating the positions of the other operatives. "I suggest you start moving toward the emergency evacuation points." "We're not leaving," Voss replied, though she was already activating her emergency communicator to alert station security about the bomb threat. "Whatever you've done, we can contain it." Marcus almost smiled at her confidence. "Agent Voss, in approximately 7 minutes, this station is going to lose primary power, life support, structural integrity, and communications simultaneously. The explosions will be designed to look like a cascade failure caused by aging infrastructure and inadequate maintenance. No one will suspect sabotage until forensic teams spend months analyzing the wreckage. Commander Torres was slowly maneuvering to get a clear shot, his cybernetic enhancements calculating trajectory angles and probability matrices. But Marcus tracked his movement without even appearing to look in his direction.
Commander, I wouldn't recommend that approach.
Agent Park is a very dedicated young man, and I'd hate to see his career end prematurely.
Let him go, Torres said. You want to escape, fine. But don't take innocent people with you. Innocent?
Marcus's voice carried a hint of something that might have been amusement.
Commander, do you know who paid me to kill Admiral Zarath?
The question caught all four operatives off guard.
Professional assassins rarely discuss their clients, and never during active operations.
The contract came through channels connected to Terran Defense Command. Someone in your own military wanted the Admiral dead badly enough to pay 50 million credits for a clean elimination. Agent Voss felt the world shift slightly beneath her feet.
That's impossible. Admiral Zarath was negotiating defense contracts that would benefit human colonies. Was he? Or was he negotiating something else entirely?
Marcus adjusted his grip on Agent Park, maintaining perfect tactical positioning.
6 minutes, 40 seconds. What kind of contracts? Torres demanded.
The kind that would have given the hegemony access to human military technology in exchange for protection against threats from the Outer Rim.
Technology that certain elements within TDF believe should never be shared with non-human species, regardless of the strategic benefits.
Agent Rivera, who had been silent since the confrontation began, finally spoke up.
You're saying this was sanctioned? Not officially.
But the payment authorization codes were genuine, and the intelligence provided about Admiral Zarath's security arrangements could only have come from someone with high-level access to hegemony operational data.
Marcus was telling the truth, though not the complete truth.
He had suspected from the beginning that this contract was more than a simple assassination.
The payment was too large, the intelligence too detailed, and the timing too convenient.
Someone within the human power structure had wanted Admiral Zarath eliminated to prevent a treaty that they viewed as dangerous to human interests.
Even if that's true, Voss said, it doesn't justify mass murder. How many people are going to die when those explosions go off?
Fewer than would die if the Admiral's treaty had been signed. Sometimes, Agent Voss, the mathematics of survival required difficult choices.
The station's emergency lighting flickered again, more pronounced this time.
Warning signals began sounding from various systems throughout the security checkpoint, indicating that critical infrastructure was beginning to show signs of stress.
Marcus had designed the countdown sequence to provide multiple warnings before the actual explosions.
He wasn't a terrorist, he was a professional who eliminated specific targets for specific reasons.
But, if cornered, he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to complete his mission and ensure his survival. 5 minutes, 30 seconds. I strongly recommend evacuation.
Commander Torres made his decision. His enhanced reflexes and tactical systems had been calculating probabilities throughout the conversation, and the window for a clean takedown was rapidly closing. He moved with inhuman speed, his cybernetic limbs providing acceleration and precision that no unaugmented human could match. Marcus had been expecting this. The water vendor might have been caught off guard by such an attack, but the droplet had survived 3 decades by being better than anyone expected. He released Agent Park at the exact moment Torres committed to his attack vector, spinning away from the commander's path while simultaneously drawing a weapon that had been hidden in his jacket.
The weapon wasn't a conventional pistol or energy beam.
It was a delivery system for the same binary compound that had killed Admiral Zarath, modified for aerial dispersal and contact activation. Torres realized his mistake in the milliseconds before the compound cloud enveloped him. His cybernetic filters began emergency purification procedures, but the toxin was designed to penetrate even advanced protective systems. Neural disruptor, Marcus said as Torres collapsed, his enhanced systems shorting out as the compound attacked both organic and cybernetic neural pathways. He'll live, but those expensive implants are going to need complete replacement. Agent Park was already moving, trying to reach his dropped weapon, but Marcus was faster.
A precise strike to the young man's solar plexus dropped him without permanent injury. 4 minutes, 20 seconds.
Agent Voss found herself alone and facing an opponent who had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in her training manuals. Agent Rivera was helping Torres, whose cybernetic systems were sparking and failing as the neural disruptor did its work.
This is your last chance, Agent Voss. The evacuation pods can reach minimum safe distance if you leave now. Why are you warning us? You could have killed us all by now. Marcus considered the question while maintaining his tactical advantage.
Because you're doing your jobs.
You identified a threat to security and investigated it professionally.
The fact that you succeeded in finding me demonstrates competence that I respect.
He gestured toward the emergency exit.
The Admiral was a legitimate military target whose death served strategic purposes. You are intelligence operatives following orders and protecting civilians.
There's a difference. And if we don't evacuate?
Then, you'll discover why the droplet has never failed to complete a mission. Agent Voss looked at her fallen colleagues, at the weapons she couldn't use effectively at this range, at the countdown that was rapidly approaching zero. Every tactical assessment pointed to the same conclusion: retreat and regroup, or die uselessly trying to stop something that was already in motion.
3 minutes, 40 seconds. Rivera. Voss called out. Get Torres to the evacuation pods. Now. Agent Rivera looked up from Torres's convulsing form. What about you? I'm staying. Someone has to try to stop this.
Marcus shook his head slowly. Agent Voss, I've planted charges throughout this station with enough explosive power to crack the hull in 12 different locations. Even if you could find and disarm one or two, the others would still detonate and cause catastrophic damage.
You cannot stop this. Then, why haven't you left already? Because my extraction point is in the opposite direction from the evacuation routes.
I'm staying until the last possible moment to ensure you have time to reach safety. It was a strange moment, a professional assassin showing concern for the well-being of the law enforcement officers trying to capture him. But it reflected something fundamental about Marcus's code of ethics. He killed when necessary, destroyed when cornered, but he took no pleasure in unnecessary death.
2 minutes, 50 seconds.
Agent Rivera hauled the semi-conscious Torres toward the emergency exit, his cybernetic systems still sparking and failing. Agent Park was recovering his breath but moving slowly toward the same exit.
Agent Voss remained in position, her weapon trained on Marcus. Agent Voss, you're making a mistake. Maybe.
But I swore an oath to protect people, and that includes the civilians who are about to die because of what you've done.
The civilians will have time to evacuate if you stop wasting precious seconds trying to be a hero. Marcus was genuinely concerned now.
The explosions would begin with the power generation systems, causing a cascade failure that would trigger emergency evacuation procedures throughout the station.
Most people would have enough time to reach safety if they started moving immediately. But if Agent Voss delayed the evacuation procedures by continuing this pointless confrontation, people would die unnecessarily. 2 minutes, 10 seconds. I'm not leaving, Voss said firmly.
Marcus sighed and made a decision that surprised even him. He lowered his weapon and stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender.
Then, I'm coming with you. What? The bombs can be disarmed. The countdown can be stopped.
But only with my biometric authorization and the correct abort codes. Marcus was improvising now, but his voice carried complete conviction.
If you want to save lives, Agent Voss, you need me alive and cooperative. It was a lie, but a convincing one. The explosive charges were designed to detonate automatically without any possibility of remote disarmament.
Marcus had never intended to give himself any way to stop the countdown once it began, too much risk that he might be captured and forced to abort a mission he needed to complete.
But Agent Voss didn't know that. Where are the charges? 12 locations throughout the station. power generation, life support, structural supports, communication arrays. Each one requires a different authorization code that only I know. 1 minute, 40 seconds. Agent Voss made the hardest decision of her career. Instead of trying to capture or kill the most dangerous assassin she had ever encountered, she was going to trust him to help save thousands of lives. Show me. Marcus nodded and began moving toward the nearest maintenance access panel. As he walked, he activated a hidden transmitter that sent a single coded signal to a contact ship waiting at the edge of the system. The signal meant, mission accomplished. Target eliminated. Operative needs immediate extraction. What Agent Voss didn't know was that the abort codes Marcus was entering into the maintenance panel were actually instructions for a controlled detonation sequence that would create maximum chaos while minimizing casualties. The explosions would still occur, but in a pattern that would drive people toward evacuation routes rather than away from them. 30 seconds. Is it working? Voss asked, watching Marcus's fingers fly over the control interface. Almost there. Marcus entered the final command sequence and stepped back from the panel. Deep within New Geneva Station's infrastructure, a dozen explosive charges received new targeting instructions and delay timers. 10 seconds. The explosions began exactly on schedule, but instead of catastrophic hull breaches and massive structural failures, they created a series of controlled emergencies that triggered immediate evacuation procedures without causing significant casualties. Power fluctuations instead of total blackouts. Atmospheric leaks instead of decompression. Structural damage instead of complete collapse. Agent Voss felt the station shudder around them as the charges detonated, but the emergency lighting remained functional and the evacuation alarms were working perfectly. "You actually did it," she said, looking at Marcus with something approaching respect. "I told you I wasn't a terrorist, Agent Voss. I'm a professional." What she didn't see was Marcus palming a small device that had been hidden in the maintenance panel, a personal teleporter that would transport him directly to his extraction ship the moment he activated it. "Agent Voss, you should know that this conversation never happened. The water vendor Marcus Chen died in the explosions, along with any evidence connecting him to Admiral Zayrath's death. The droplet remains a legend, and the case remains unsolved." Marcus activated the teleporter just as Agent Voss lunged forward to stop him. She found herself grasping empty air in a maintenance corridor that reeked of smoke and overloaded electronics. 3 hours later, Agent Voss filed her report on the New Geneva Station incident. A terrorist attack by unknown perpetrators had caused significant infrastructure damage but minimal casualties due to effective emergency response procedures. The investigation into Admiral Zayrath's death remained open, but all leads had been exhausted. Marcus Chen, water vendor, was listed among the missing and presumed dead. Somewhere in the Outer Rim territories, an old man with a new identity was already establishing a new cover as a simple maintenance worker on a mining station where nobody asked too many questions about the past. The droplet had completed his final mission. But legends, like water, have a way of finding new channels when the old ones are blocked. Agent Voss never stopped looking for him. And, somewhere in the galaxy, people still whispered about the assassin who could kill anyone, anywhere, without leaving a trace. The old water vendor was gone, but the legend lived on. And, maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what Marcus had planned all along.